Welcome back, everyone, to the eCoreAcademy e-learning platform. In today's video, for Meet the Champ section, we're going to be interviewing a very special guest, Mr. LOSCHIAVO'S. Mr. LOSCHIAVO'S has spoken on topics of innovation, entrepreneurship, and strategy all across the United States, the UK, Europe, and Asia, and he most recently conducted a tour in China. Now, he's part of the clinical entrepreneurship activities at Drexel University, housed within the Lawrence A. Bida Institute for Entrepreneurship. He's also become the executive director, and as of 2002 in Drexel University, when this program rose to the top 10 ranked universities for entrepreneurship in the nation. He specializes in business formation, change management, and innovation. He has leadership experiences, and he's also helped many startups grow. He is also the co-founder and one of the owners and board members of Sonero, which is one of the initial companies established that's designed for the business model and develop the long-term and short-term business plan, and is part of the due diligence process with venture capital firms. So I hope this interview is going to be very helpful for you all. I know it's helpful for me in terms of giving me some advice and giving me some insight on an expert, I'd say, in this field of business innovation and just in general life advice. So I really hope you all enjoyed this interview. Welcome back, everyone, to the eCoreAcademy e-learning platform. My name is AJay Raj, joined here with Mr. LOSCHIAVO'S for the eCore Meet the Champ section. So, Mr. LOSCHIAVO'S, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, AJay.
So here at this platform, obviously, in our Meet the Champ section, we're going to be interviewing very successful individuals in their own fields. And I'm so excited to have Mr. LOSCHIAVO'S here for this opportunity to give you a little bit more insight on his career and many of his own personal advice. So before we get into the video, please make sure to do 4 things. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button on this video, turn on post notifications, and leave a comment down below. All of those things are really greatly appreciated. So as I was saying, Mr. LOSCHIAVO'S, you have an amazing and unique background covering many aspects of the professional world, ranging from startups to corporate teaching and speaking internationally, as well as inspiring the young generation of entrepreneurs. There's a wealth of knowledge that we can gain from your wisdom, but in the interest of limited time, I would like to focus on the following 3 topics: innovation, entrepreneurship, and leadership. So before we dive into a deeper discussion of these areas, can you please give us some insight into your high school and college experiences and how they contributed to your profession?
Sure, I'd be glad to. That's going back a ways for me, AJ. But as far as high school is concerned, probably what I learned more than anything else during my years in high school really wasn't so much the academics as it was learning how to get along with all kinds of different people. It's kind of interesting. I was involved with sports, but I got to know a lot of the jocks. I was the photographer and the sports editor for the yearbook staff, so got to know that group of people. I was involved with music and drama, so I got involved with those people, and I even got to know some of the bad boys in the high school. In fact, one time I was getting ready to play a tennis match, and it was actually at night, and I was at a place where they actually had a music venue outside. They were having a concert, but I was going to go play some tennis. I was in the locker room, and 4 big guys, leather jackets, who were just looking for something to, some kind of mischief to get into, came walking up to me as I was getting my racket out of the locker, and one of them said, "Yeah, that's a really nice racket." And I said, "Yeah, thanks. I like it too." And he says, "Oh, maybe we should take that racket." And so, a lot of things are going through my mind. One is can I use this racket as a weapon? Can I outrun all 4 of these guys? Can I talk my way out of that?
Yeah.
And just about that time, turns out the leader of the gang, who hadn't been in the locker room, comes walking into the locker room, and he sees me and he says, "Hey, Mark," and he comes over, and these guys say, "You know him?" And he puts his arm around me. He says, "Yeah, he's a good guy." And so they left me alone. And the reason for that was it just so happened that a few weeks before, I saw him out. He was having car trouble, and I saw him out in the parking lot having car trouble, and I went over and gave him a hand. I just didn't know him, but it was an opportunity to, I saw somebody in need. It was an opportunity to help somebody, and probably saved me from getting banged up that night, or at least losing my tennis racket. So one of the things I learned, I guess, in high school more than anything was that try to get to know people regardless of whether they're in the group that you're involved in or not, and try to see things from kind of their perspective. And it was a kind of a double-sided or a double-edged sword, because I never felt like I belonged to any one group. I always sort of felt a little bit like an outsider in all of those groups that I mentioned. But I also felt comfortable, being around and being able to talk to just about anybody. In college, I guess it was a little different. When I went to college, I wasn't prepared for college. I didn't really learn how to study effectively in high school because I didn't really have to. I was able to get by quite well without, any kind of disciplined study and that sort of thing, or any kind of preparedness. And so from my first full semester, at least, I know there was an interesting contrast between me and one of the kids that was in the dorm room right across the hall from me. He was a chemical engineering student. He had tested out of his whole first year. He was one of those kind of guys. He was a valedictorian at his high school. He was like super, super smart. And I noticed something after about a week or two. He was pledging a fraternity. He was a chemical engineering student. He was basically taking second year classes, or at least second semester classes. And what he would do is every night we'd go to dinner together, and after dinner, he'd go sit down at his desk. It was set up just for studying. He had a space just for studying, and he would study. He would work at his desk for maybe an hour. He'd get up and he'd go, to the fraternity house. I, on the other hand, had one of those study pillows on my bed with the TV on, and sat there all night long and probably accomplished far less than he did in that 1 hour where he was studying. And it took me a while to figure that out and to realize that there's lots of ways to try to study, and you really have to be prepared. So preparedness became kind of a theme for me, and I had to learn how to do that. I had to sort of train myself. How do you go about doing a better job of preparing to study so that you have a place where you're going to be uninterrupted, you're not going to have background noise, that kind of stuff. I think the other thing that I learned in college was perspective. For some reason, when I was in college, I had this tremendous sense of responsibility. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with my life. I switched majors a lot. And so I felt a lot of anxiety in my first and quite frankly, the beginning of my sophomore year. And I've always been a big reader, at least ever since the fourth grade or so. And so I ended up reading through the entire set of volumes of Jacques Cousteau's Undersea World, because I was a diver, so I really liked ocean stuff. And what I got from that was perspective. It helped me to realize that now for some people this might be kind of a scary thing, but it worked for me. It made me realize just how insignificant I was and how insignificant my life was. And that gave me the perspective that it sort of gave me permission to not worry so much about what I was going to do, because the world was going to go on and this great universe was going to continue. And that was very liberating for me. It allowed me to relax and really get more focused on what I wanted to do. The other one I mentioned, that I switched majors a lot. I was all over the place. I had like 3 or 4 different majors in my first year. And it really wasn't until around my sophomore year that I ended up taking an entrance exam to find out what I might be interested in. And that's a whole other story, and I won't go into the details, but I ended up deciding that maybe being a trial lawyer, a litigator, would be a good direction to go. And so I asked around and was told economics was a good pre-law major. So I started taking economics courses. And what happened is I actually fell in love with the topic of entrepreneurship. I mean, of economics, and I had a real passion for it. So that's what I actually ended up. I didn't never went to law school. I ended up doing all my graduate work in economics because there was something very challenging about it for me, and it generated passion. So I finally had something that I felt a passion for, and what I found is that if you're passionate about whatever it is you're working on, you're going to be better at it. You're going to be more likely to excel, and you're going to be more likely to stick with it. And so that was an important sort of learning thing for me. Is to college helped me gain some perspective, and I don't mean to. I don't want you to think that by the time I was in college I had this grand perspective. These are things that I had to continue to remind myself of as I got into my professional life and that sort of thing. But that was important to me. The other thing, quite frankly, is during those times, whether it was when I was in high school and I had a swimming pool cleaner business where I sold and serviced automated swimming pool cleaners, or whether it was the side jobs that I had when I was in college, is that how you treat others, how you treat people, can go a long way to helping you to kind of navigate through those times, and that has really served me well through my whole life. When I was in graduate school, I was working in the dean's office, and this was back before computers. There were still electric typewriters, and so if you had term papers or any kind of stuff like that you had to type, you had to do it on a typewriter. And the dean's secretary I worked in the same area with the dean's secretary, and every morning she loved honey buns, which was just a little, a little breakfast treat. And I would stop at the local little convenience store on the way into work in the mornings, and I'd always bring her a honey bun, and she would always put a thing of butter on it and drop it in the toaster oven, and then she loved those, and so I got real friendly with the dean's secretary. And as it turns out, and I will tell you, when I was doing this, I had no motivations other than to make a friend. But then she would walk by, and I would be trying to type my term papers, and I thought I was pretty good at typing, but I really wasn't. And of course, she could type with blinding speed, and she'd walk by, and then she'd walk by again, and then she'd walk by again, and then she'd say, "Just give it to me," because it was just driving her crazy to see how hard I was, how much I was struggling just to try to type this thing. So she started typing all my term papers. So I learned at that time that, even in business later on, if you really want to get access to the top executive in the organization, get to know his secretary, because oftentimes they're his gatekeeper. They're the ones that are going to keep you from seeing him if he or can help grant you access. So it really comes down to understanding that if you just treat everybody like you'd like to be treated, it really works out for you.
Okay. So thank you. That was really insightful. It's interesting how those, minor lessons that you learn, things that you think are like really small when it comes to high school and college, how those really play up into your career as you grow and progress. And like you said, many of those things are changing moments, and a lot of those things are very important lessons to learn, just like the golden rule, what goes around comes around. And in business, I definitely think that's a valuable lesson. So on to our second question. So as a knowledgeable and accomplished individual in business and innovation, you became the leader of the Entrepreneurship program in Drexel for more than a decade. What were some highlights of your experience running this program, and how did this benefit the Drexel student community in your eyes?
Well, the highlights were working with the students and the entrepreneurs, quite frankly, and the small team that we had assembled. That was the highlights. I mean, I I got to see the best of the best as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, a lot of my contemporaries that around that same time were grumbling about, you know, this generation of kids that are coming up, the millennials coming up, and they're so entitled and blah, blah, blah. And I would always say, I don't know what kids you're hanging out with, but let me tell you, the ones I'm hanging out with are dedicated, they're working hard, they're motivated, they're a lot smarter than I was when I was their age, and they are the future of the, so that was just a wonderful experience for me, because I got to see that. Not everybody gets to have access to that kind of young talent. As far as, you know, our focus and what we did, our focus was pretty simple. We broke it down to two things. We wanted to create interest and passion in the areas of innovation and entrepreneurship. And then we were interested in providing tools and perspectives on how to be successful in doing that. So those were the two fundamental focus items that we had. And so everything that we did, we had multiple programs that we developed over the years. And every time and I'm an idea kind of guy, so I was always popping up with an idea about another program or another thing we wanted to do. But my colleague would, because she understood how important that was for those two things I mentioned, which is generating interest and passion and providing tools and perspectives. We helped keep each other sort of in line to make sure that that any new program fit within that sort of two-dimensional, if you will, you know, XY axis type of thing. And so everything we did from that perspective. Everything we did with that focus. And I think that helped us to sort of achieve our objectives. And it was just you know, great fun and great run. I still keep in touch with a lot of the entrepreneurs from that period of time, and a lot of my students from that period of time, even though that was quite a while ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much about sharing your experience there. The program itself, I can definitely tell, is very insightful. I myself probably would have been very privileged to have gone through that program. And who knows, maybe that's a potential for me to, you know, go through that program and potentially see the impact and the marks that you've left there at Drexel. So on to our third question. So you've traveled around the world and given speeches on various topics. In your opinion, how are we in the US doing compared to the rest of the world?
That's a tough question. There's, you know, I'll tell you where I think we have an advantage. And then I'll tell you where I think we may have some things that we need to be concerned with. One of the advantages that I think that we have in this country, based on what I've seen in other countries, is that the idea of entrepreneurship is very much, or innovation is very heavily weighted toward what I'll call just the private sector. Okay, the reliance for whether it's grant monies or whether it's reliance for you know, trying to find benefactors for instance, for the Beata Center when we were running that. That all came from private donations from private contributors. When I went to the UK and I was speaking to some folks there from a number of different European countries, when the subject of how to get funding, because the folks that I was speaking to had centers similar to what we were doing. And they were all struggling with the same thing. How do we get funding? And they were all looking toward the federal government to get that funding. And I came, you know, I popped up and said, why are you looking there? Why aren't you looking to, you know, private sources? Why aren't you looking to private benefactors? And the answer I was kind of startled by, and I should have known better, but I was still startled by it. You live in your own world, right? You sort of lose perspective of other things. But they said, our private sector doesn't think that way. Their point of view is we pay taxes, the government's supposed to take care of stuff like that. And so this gets into that whole issue of just how much government involvement do you have, you know, in certain things, and how much do you leave to the private sector? And I don't want to turn this into a political argument one way or the other, but it is important to note that the more we rely on the federal government to do, the more people will rely on the federal government to do, and they won't feel compelled themselves to want to reach out and do that. So I think the fact that we have a very vibrant innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem out there that's largely made up by the private sector. The government gets involved and can be very, very helpful. But if you look at the weight of that, the vast majority of that's coming from private citizens, private companies, private investors, people who have gone through the process themselves, had very successful exits where they've sold their company or taken it public, made a lot of money, and now they're putting money back into the system by helping other entrepreneurs and other innovators get started. And that works. That system truly does work. And I think that gives us an advantage. I think the other thing that gives us an advantage is that there's sort of the part of the American culture, which is one of sort of independence and a desire to make it on our own type of thing. And don't get me wrong, I don't believe that any successful entrepreneur really makes it on their own. Any successful entrepreneur that says they did it all on their own is either delusional or they're just lying to themselves and lying to you. Yeah. You don't get there alone. You get there with the help of so many people. But there's still a sense of responsibility at the individual level that says, I have to make this work. I have to make this successful. Yeah. And that is a very powerful tool. When I was over in China, what I found was it's a much different sort of environment. And because of that, and by the way, if you look at their weight, it's almost entirely funded by their government. And I will tell you that once their central government got behind it, the amount of money that flowed into innovation and entrepreneurship was staggering. I saw tech centers that dwarfed anything I've ever seen in the U.S. And yet, interestingly enough, they were thrilled with the fact that they had a 50% occupancy. And, in the US, we wouldn't be happy unless it was, we had a waiting list. So it's a different mentality there because of that. And so the other big difference I saw is that the entrepreneurs that I worked with weren't afraid of failure. They knew that, much like scientific discovery, there's going to be failures in order to get the right answer eventually. And what I found when I was in China is the thought of failure. In fact, I was speaking in front of a large group one day, and it was a mix of students, government officials, and business executives. And I asked by a show of hands, how many of you think it's okay to fail? Okay. Well, not only did nobody raise their hand, but I actually saw anxiety in people's faces at just the thought of failure. And the fact of the matter is, if you want to be a successful innovator, or if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to be comfortable with the fact that you're going to fail along the way. The key is to fail forward, to fail quickly enough that you're not out of money or time when you make the fail, but also to fail so that you're learning from it, you're modifying, you're improving, and you're moving forward. Michael Dell, you never hear him talk about failures. He talks about setbacks, and that's the mentality that so many of the entrepreneurs in the U.S. have, is they see failures as nothing but setbacks. The founder of QVC, once when asked about his success with QVC, his answer was, why is it that people always want to ask me about my success with QVC? How come nobody wants to ask me about the 17 failures before I got to QVC? So I think that's somewhat unique to the US, and I think it's an advantage. The concern I have is that we cannot lose that. We need to understand the value and the power of that. And then the other concern I have, quite frankly, is what you look at a country like China, a lot of it's just that it can become a numbers game. There are so many people in China that, on a percentage basis, if you look at the percentage of their population, they may not be terribly successful, but they don't have to have nearly as high a percentage of their population be successful in order for that to have a significant impact, just because there's so many of them.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was I think that was excellent to really just give us insight into what you're thinking about and your personal experiences as well. And just building up off of that question, essentially, I think the United States, like historically, has been considered, they've been at the pinnacle, they've been at the highest point of the world, at least for the past century or so. But now things have slowly changed. Maybe COVID could have been, a catalyst for this. But slowly other countries such as Brazil, China, their infrastructure, and many other programs that their government structure has implemented is helping many of these smaller businesses and just business overall in these countries to develop. So do you see that it is likely for many of these other up and coming countries to essentially overtake the United States?
I think it's a possibility. I really do. I mean, like I said, there's a couple of things. One is just numbers. When you look at India, when you look at China, there's it's just they're a very large population. So, and there's a lot of really smart people in those places.
Yeah.
And so the numbers tells me that there's a real opportunity for success there. As I mentioned before, China has put a tremendous amount of infrastructure behind innovation and entrepreneurship. So I think that's going to help them. Israel has always been, pretty amazing in the areas of entrepreneurship. So I think there's a lot of countries that are very well positioned. I don't think we should worry so much about them. I think what we should worry mostly about is making sure that we don't lose what we have. Okay. And my concern is that we don't become complacent, and that we don't somehow think that it's just that we somehow become, stop being hungry for this level of success. I was reading an article in the New York Times just last week that I think it was something like 4.5 million people quit their jobs in the U.S. in the month of November. Wow. And they're talking about 2021 as being the big resignation, right? Yeah. Where people are just decided they're going to stop working. And I think part of that is because a lot of people were given money as relief for the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. But again, if we lose our will to succeed, if we lose our will to be productive and our will to be successful, that's not a good thing, because at the end of the day, one of the questions I used to ask my entrepreneurs all the time, especially when high school students would come in and we'd speak to them I was at Drexel. Mm-hmm. I would ask them, why do you want to be an entrepreneur? Because these were always students who thought they wanted to be entrepreneurs. Why do you want to be an entrepreneur? And in the early years when I was doing that, most of them would say things like, I want to become rich. And my response to them is, if you want to become rich, I would suggest you get a really good education, go to work for a big company, and be successful in that company for as long as you can, because that's your most certain way to get wealth, to generate wealth. Yeah. That becoming an entrepreneur, getting rich is not a good reason to become an entrepreneur. Mm. At the end of the day, you want to be an entrepreneur because you want to make a difference in the world. You want to have a positive impact in some way. You want to provide for something that needs to be provided for. And if you're successful, of course, you can make money, and that's a terrific thing. But I've never thought that money should be the motivator. It's more about feeling a passion for something and really wanting to make a difference. And I just hope, I hope that if I could give any message to the people that are listening to this, is we need you to be productive. We need you to find solutions to problems. Mm-hmm. It's about problem solving. As you were asking me about college before, one of the other things that I learned in college was how much, and one of the things I found that was so exciting about economics is it taught me how to problem solve. Yeah. And I think so much of it is about solving problems, finding out what needs to be fixed, and how can we go about that. So if I have a concern at all, it's more about our mentality and our culture toward trying to be successful and to be productive and do great things.
Mhm. And I definitely think that nowadays, well, with the United States kind of being a mesh, just like the melting pot of so many different cultures, like you said, we've kind of have to capitalize on our own culture, the American culture, and we can't kind of let that slip. I feel like way back in 100 years ago, we had that determination and drive, and we can't let that obviously like dissipate over time. So we definitely need to come back after this COVID-19 pandemic and I guess reclaim our position. So on to our fifth question. Along with your seasonal corporate experience, you've taught several courses in colleges and universities. So how are you able to keep yourself informed in each sector of your career while maintaining the balance between these many professions? Please share your experiences from teaching.
Well, I mentioned before that I love to read. It's kind of interesting because I wasn't a bookish kid. In fact, I was always outside. I love the outdoors. I was always very active. So I give my parents the credit for that. I was also I would get in trouble quite a bit when I was a kid. I was always getting into something. And so it was my fourth grade. When I was in fourth grade, it seemed like that whole winter, that whole school season, I was grounded. And just about the time I would get ungrounded, I would do something else stupid and get grounded again. And back then, we didn't have any laptops or tablets or iPods or iPhones or TVs in our bedroom or anything like that. So basically, all I had to do was read. And so I went through every volume of Hardy Boys books, which was a series of books that was written many, many years ago. And once I finished that, I went through my sister's entire library of Nancy Drew detective books. And I fell in love with reading. And ever since then, I've been an avid reader. And that's something I've just carried with me throughout my life. I think that, I just was constantly reading anything I get my hands on the subjects that you talk about. I also like to read a lot of fiction. So that's largely how I kept up. And then also just always curious and always asking questions. So those were the two major things, really.
I think that's obviously when it came up to building up who you are in terms of your personality, I definitely think that we should go back to the basics. I myself, I probably should start reading a little bit more. Times have changed. Obviously, we have more access to obviously like technology, things like that. Sometimes we get immersed with social media, some things that are a lot more modern, but maybe going back to the basics would really help me out and everyone else who's watching. So for our next question, from your own experiences, could you please provide some advice on how to become an effective public speaker and how to draw the attention of the audience while clearly pitching an idea? So this could be for a potential business pitch to a group of investors or at a business demo to a large audience of future customers. What are the most effective ways to be an effective communicator?
Well, I would start by saying that you want to understand as much as you can about the audience and what their objective is in being there. And if at all possible to understand maybe what their experiences are coming into this, because if you can sort of see yourself through their eyes, or at least try to, and then you're going to be much more effective at communicating with them. Because at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to do is communicate, right? Yeah. And you can't communicate if you're speaking in a way that they can't even relate to. So it's really important to try to understand where they're coming from. And then the other thing too is you can't take yourself too seriously. I took courses on how to make presentations and stuff like that. And frankly, most of them just seemed robotic to me. And it just seemed like it was taking me out of who I was. Okay. And I realized I just have to be who I am. And there are things there are tricks and stuff you can do to keep from becoming distracted distracting because you're, flailing around up there and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, people will get past that, any sort of idiosyncrasies that you might have, rather quickly if you can connect with them, if you can engage with them. Then you also need to understand what your objective is. What is it you're trying to accomplish? Because at the end of the speech or at the end of the presentation, my hope isn't somebody comes up to me and says, "Great presentation," because that wasn't my objective. My hope is that they'll come up and say, "Wow, I really loved what that one thing that you talked about really resonated with me, and I want to spend some more time looking into that. I want to research that a little further. I want to spend some time getting to know more about that." That's usually my objective. Is I'm trying to communicate something to them, but I'm also trying to create a hunger in them to want to learn more about whatever it is that I'm pitching, if you will.
Yeah.
And that goes for investors, right? You don't have to make the whole sale and display everything with the investors. What you hope for is they say, "We want to talk more with you," right?
Yeah.
"We want to learn more about this company," because that's when you know you've got them engaged.
Yeah.
The worst thing when you go to investors, if they say, "Great presentation." A lot of people can do great presentations. The question is, do we think you can, we want to actually give you our money and trust our money to you. And so my objective is always to engage them to the point where they don't want that to end. They want to spend more time either learning about a topic or learning about my company or my business idea or whatever it might happen to be.
Okay. Well, definitely, I've had some personal experience, obviously, presenting in school. I think they really try to push us. And one thing that I think schools have implemented nowadays is when you get to like higher level classes like AP language or even just advanced honors English classes, the teachers really give you a lot of freedom. They don't give you like a systemic approach, like you were saying, a lot of courses being more robotic. So I feel like I can be more of myself when I'm communicating with my peers. And I feel like that kind of gets the message across better, and it also ups my grade as well. So I definitely think that it is useful, and I think times are changing. And when it comes to the professional setup, I think we can take a lot of those experiences and apply them. So on to our next question. Can you please share some advice for high school students like me and many others who use our platform on how to become an up-and-coming entrepreneur, one that creates a direct, significant change in an industry that aligns with his or her passion? In other words, how can an entrepreneur become unique and valuable to the industry?
Well, a couple of things I would start with. One is you mentioned social media, and I think it's a very powerful tool. You also mentioned that one of the things somewhat unique to the United States is that we're sort of this tossed salad or melting pot or whatever term you want to use, that we have so many people from so many different points of view. The advantage to social media is it gives you access to so many points of views from so many different people. The biggest disadvantage to social media is people tend to group themselves in these tribes, and you have to be very careful that it doesn't turn into a big group think. And I think one of the most dangerous things going on right now with social media, and one of the most dangerous things is going on right now in this country, and one of the reasons why this country is so divisive, is that I could come up with the most trophy-winning stupid idea in the world, or the most crazy outlandish conspiracy theory in the world, and if I were to post that on social media, I'm sure I could get a tribe of people who would agree with me. Yeah. And the problem with that is you start then communicating with those people, and you actually start believing that nonsense. And one of the advices I would give is, I'm not suggesting stay away from social media. I think it can be a powerful tool. What I am suggesting is that you don't get confined to people who just agree with you. Make sure that you engage with other people from other points of view. And again, the beauty of this country is that we have that opportunity. We all look and sound and so much different. We all come from so many different experiences and backgrounds. So use that to our advantage, because you learn so much more if you just honor where someone's come from and hear where their point of view is. And that's where I think it's at that intersection where really good things happen. So that's one piece of advice I would give to high school students. The other one is find something that you're passionate about. I've seen very successful entrepreneurs who've had, have sold their companies, or like I said, have taken them public and have done very well. And yet when they tried a different business that they tried to start, they weren't as successful at it. And oftentimes it's because they didn't feel the same passion for it. So find something that you're really passionate about, because those are the things that you're likely to excel in. The other thing I would suggest is that in addition to finding something that you're passionate about, look for a way that you can solve a problem or meet a need. Okay, you might be very passionate about something, and you may have a really, really cool product, but if it doesn't solve enough people's needs, or solve a significant enough problem, it's just kind of a neat thing, and you might enjoy it, and a couple of your friends might enjoy it, but it's really not going to make much of a difference, and it's probably not going to be very successful. So find something that you feel a sense of purpose toward, and then find something that really is solving a problem or meeting a need. And the beauty of that is you don't have to do like a 20-page research project on this. A lot of that can be done by just going out and talking to people and asking them, would this solve a problem, or what problems do you see? And then finally, just be curious. Spend as much time as possible asking questions. Well, I spoke in 5 different cities in China to thousands of people over that period of time. Mm. And the one person that I remember the most in that experience wasn't one of the good high-level government officials that I met with, wasn't with one of the business executives that I met with. Mm. It was at the end of one presentation that I gave, which was a room full of mostly government officials and business executives, but there were a few students there. And at the end of the presentation, people were coming up and they were asking me questions, and they were wanting to do little interviews for like some kind of a podcast, or maybe for the local news or something. I don't know what it was. Yeah. And there was this one young lady who was a student, and she was peppering me with questions. Yeah. And they were questions because she was truly curious and she was wanting to learn. And so I was answering her questions. And then after like the second question, somebody kind of told her, okay, that you've asked enough questions. And she was unrelenting. She was not going to give up. She was like ready to elbow these people, because she wanted to, and I said, we've got time. And I sort of asked them to kind of leave her alone. And that's the one person I remember more than anybody else. And the reason is because she truly was inquisitive. She was very curious. She was wanting to learn. She was thirsty for that sort of thing. And that's the best thing you can have as an individual, whether you're young or old, alike, is that curiosity, that desire to learn, that desire to figure things out. And so never lose that. So those are the things I guess I would suggest.
And I think those are excellent words of wisdom to actually end off this interview. So thank you so much, Mr. LOSCHIAVO'S. Thank you all for watching. This has been the eCoreAcademy learning platform here at the Meet the Champ section. So stoked to have Mr. LOSCHIAVO'S here to really give you guys this part of his advice, and really walk you through the whole entire aspect and the theme of this video on business, technology, and innovation, but also to implement this into your own daily lives and your progression as individuals. So thank you all for watching. Please make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button on this video, leave a comment down below on what you thought. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one.
Thank you for what you're doing, AJ.
Thank you so much. Yeah.